What's up, gang? Welcome to the Greatness Machine. I'm your host, Darius Mashazde. I'm so pumped to have you here with me. Now listen, the Greatness Machine, we're about two things. Number one, people who are living their passions. And number two, those who are creating greatness in the world and doing both of these things despite the odds against them. Each episode, we're going to feature interviews with game changers, business leaders, telling us their origin stories, what made them tick, what got them to where they are now. Why? So it can help you step into your greatness within your life, your business, and your career. Occasionally, you might hear a few solo episodes from myself, moi, as I say, as I leverage my 20 years of entrepreneurship as a CEO and founder to help you grow and level up in your journey to scale your life and your business. So come be a fly on the wall, enjoy the conversation, and I'm stoked to have you here with me. Guys, welcome to this episode of The Greatness Machine. I'm your host, Darius Mashazde, and boy, do we have a special guest, Leyla. I can't believe that's up here. All right, I practiced. I'm doing it again. Leyla.
Do you want me to say it?
No. My last name is Mashazde, Leyla. Like when you have a messed up last name like mine, you take great pride in pronouncing people's last names. Leyla Acaroglu. 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 I got it, right?
I'm giving you an A double plus for effort. Yes, it's Acaroglu. Correct.
Leyla Acaroglu is in the house. You guys, like when you see the spelling, you'll know why I'm jacking it up. I am so pumped, Leyla, to have you here. And I'm keeping this. I'm not editing that out. We're going like total messed up last name, Darius screwing it up style. How you doing? Thank you for coming on.
I'm really good. Thanks for having me. I'm so happy we've made this work, and so great to connect with you.
So likewise. So guys, Leyla, I gave her the background before the show, but I first came upon Leyla's work 11 years ago at TED. When I went to TED, I was a TED curator, as you guys all know, and it was TED 2013. I was at TED Active. She was in LA, and I was like, who is this amazing person? Like, you blew my mind. You did your talk there, which was it Paper Beats Plastic, How to Rethink the Environmental Folklore? Did I get that right?
Correct.
Something like that?
Yeah, that's it.
So it's just on this TED main stage, I said this to Leyla before the show. When you're at TED, like at some point your brain kind of explodes because everyone's like, oh my God, I love TED Talks. I'm like, yeah, 19 minutes. It's amazing. But like 20 a day for 3 days straight. So you end up like you ingest like so much stuff at once that at the end you're like, it's so much amazingness.
It's all like
my brain
mush.
It's
like when you mix all your food together on the plate.
It's like ice cream with topping. Yeah, it's gnarly. But I will say this: I was like, your talk stood out to me, and I was really impressed with your talk. You were one of my favorite speakers that year, and you just went on the list. And so fast forward to here we are, 10 years later, over 10 years later, and I was so pumped to have you come on the show. So welcome to the show. I'm so excited to have you here. I'm so excited to talk about all the amazingness you're bringing to the world. So there you go. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here. And it's so great to meet someone who was there because that was like a very intense experience. TED is an amazing place, but overwhelming, especially if you're like a young woman from Australia doing a main stage TED Talk. And, you said 19 minutes, but the most is 18. And you get given a specific time. They're not all 18 minutes. And
really?
Based on the time they give you, it's kind of how much faith they have in you. And I got 18 minutes, which was like a big deal. And that really, like, the pressure was intense. So yeah, I'm really glad to hear some positive feedback from 11 years later, because I have actually only ever watched it once. And I was like, it's
really?
not that bad. Yeah, not that bad. I'm okay with this. But when I finished it, I thought I had literally screwed up royally. That's how it felt, because it was so intense.
Oh, I didn't think I thought you were awesome. Like incredible awesome. And so I want to talk about that. But before we go there, I'm gonna give your formal bio so that folks are like, man, with Darius is jumping right into it, we're talking TED. But I want to give your formal bio, and then I'd love if we could get some origin story. I know that most people don't just wake up one morning and they're standing on the red circle at TED, right? Like you've done some amazing stuff, but I'd love to hear the story, like your origin story, what got you to what you're doing right now, and what got you on the TED stage even. But you guys, Leyla is a social entrepreneur. Like I said, 2013 TED speaker official. And a lot of people are like, oh, I spoke at TED. I'm like, no, dude, you spoke at TEDx. and I'm not trying to diminish that, but it's very, very different. Like, if anyone wants to get on a TEDx, like, email me and I'll tell you how to get on a TEDx talk. Anyone wants to get on TED, I don't know where to start. Like, good luck. It's like one of the hardest things in the world to probably get. You're a United Nations champion of the earth, sustainability and circular economy provocateur, and I remember this about your talk. You're an amazing award-winning designer, and that was I'm a huge lover of design, so that was one of the things that stood out to me, was just the way you talked about design. So, man, I'd love to hear some of your origin story, Leyla, and the audience is like clamoring to learn more about you. If you wouldn't mind, like, tell us, like, how'd you get to where you got to?
Thanks, Darius. Yeah. So, as you mentioned, design and also sociology, or like social science. So I studied product design because when I was younger, I was like, I want a career that's not going to be boring. That's how I framed it. And I assumed that being able to solve problems would be a fun job, not being stuck behind a desk, although a lot of designers end up stuck behind a desk for many hours. And I just really was very passionate about creativity, but didn't necessarily have any specific skills. So I was really frustrated by things like remote controls and how poorly, and they still to this day are poorly designed. Like, why so many buttons? Why in so many places? And so these questions kind of drove me to find this career of product design. And I went to study, and I was sitting in a class a couple years in. I'm like 19 years old, and there's this engineering professor who's like well beyond retirement, and he like opens a textbook and he's like, okay, everyone, we're going to learn about, the impact of your choices as a designer. Everything's interconnected on this planet. It's called the Gaia theory. So basically any choice you make is going to have these far-reaching impacts. And so you should probably know about it. And I'm not joking, Darius. My brain did actually explode. I was sitting there going, oh my God, why didn't anyone tell me this before? Like, of course, everything's interconnected. That makes complete sense. Oh my God, how am I going to do this job now that I have just discovered that so many of the things that I don't know are going to, like, I could have huge impacts on the planet, and that seems really irresponsible. And so I freak out. I turn to the rest of my class and I'm like, oh my God, guys, what are we going to do about this? And there was this young guy sitting next to me, and he was like, Leyla, I don't know why you're freaking out. It's not like any catastrophic environmental impacts will happen in our lifetime, so why should we care? That's a direct quote. I've never forgotten it, because I was like, oh, I'm going to make you care, and every other designer that lives on this earth is going to care. Like, it was like, you want to talk about origin calls to action? I was like, how could I and this guy have such profoundly different experiences about being exposed to this like universal truth about this planet that we live on, that everything is interdependent and that we're a part of this system? Like, so it really just, I don't know, sparked something in me. And I had no idea about this stuff. Like, I had no idea about the environment before this moment in time. Like, none of it, why would I? I was just a kid. And so I mean, I think kids these days know a lot more because of climate change and all the rest of it. But in those days, like, environmental conversations were really just a bit more about like whales and big animals. They weren't necessarily about like the interconnectedness of all of the things around us. So this really just drove me to learn more. So I went to the library, this is showing my age, and like got all the books that were on this topic, and there weren't many, and just like started diving into this. Like I was ferociously wanting information to fill this big gap that I suddenly knew. But then that drove me to basically decide I couldn't be a designer, because I was like, I don't know enough about this. Like, that knowledge gap was so profound. And the program that I was studying wasn't going to give me this information. Like, that one class was basically it. And so I went on a kind of quest to find a program anywhere in the world where I could learn, at the time, what was called eco-design, but it wasn't really available. So I ended up quitting design school and going to become a sociologist, majoring in sustainability. And so that was just about, how do humans work? How does the economy work? What are the factors that drive humans to not care about these things, and how could we actually transform that? But always with the passion of reapplying that knowledge to design. And so then I ended up working in this really cool place that doesn't exist anymore, but it was called the Center for Design, and it was a research institute into sustainable design. And I had a mentor there who taught me about this technical impact assessment process called life cycle assessment, which is super boring and very nerdy, but fascinating, right? It's like the secret story of everything that's made. And it helps you kind of get this like matrix perspective on like a toothbrush or, your glasses you're wearing. And it just is phenomenal. And it was in that moment that I really realized there was all these hidden stories behind everyday things. And so instead of being a designer that designs those things, I was like, I want to be the person that exposes the hidden story so that we can redesign these things to make them better, so that we still have incredible products and services in our lives, but that they're not having these hidden secrets that are really actually causing a lot of damage and detriment. And so that really started to become a big passion of mine, the storytelling component around, you know, the hidden lives of the everyday things. And so, yeah, I ended up being invited back to do my PhD in industrial design because I started a bunch of projects that won awards, like something called The Secret Life of Things, which was like an animation series about how exactly that, like the story of stuff, which was actually a project I was super inspired by. I don't know if you guys remember this. It's still around. It was called The Story of Stuff. It was like a really cool animation, and a woman explains like how things are made. Anyway, so essentially, I then became an entrepreneur at 25. I had no idea what I was doing. To be honest, I still don't really know, and I've started many businesses. I just make it up. In fact, I think if I knew what I was doing, I wouldn't do it. That's how I see it.
You don't know till you know.
And then you go, why did I do that? That was a terrible idea. Oh, well, I'm doing it now anyway. Might as well keep going. Anyway, and yeah, I was just really passionate about like the tool of business as a technique for making change, and, you know, being able to have autonomy in decision making, not have a boss, basically, was also really important to me. So I started just doing a lot of different creative projects, and over time have built this pretty crazy career. So at the moment, I work predominantly with like Fortune 500s and governments, where I support them in the transition to the circular economy, which is a very technical process of figuring out the life of our products that exist, but then transitioning not only the materiality and the design, but also the business model to deliver circularity, which I can go into more detail later. But it's so exciting. Like, basically, I get to ferret out how things are made and how businesses can be like engineered to work better so that they're more sustainable as a business, but that also that they're having positive impacts on the planet. Like, it's actually possibly one of the funnest jobs. Totally complicated and sometimes very depressing, but it really is an amazing career. And so I've also, I should just say, like, so when I was doing my PhD, I really got quite disillusioned by the gap that academia and the real world have. I don't know if anyone listening has gone on to do higher education. I'm sure there's lots of you. And look, I am so grateful for the knowledge that I was given through the academic system, but a lot of it was pretty redundant. Like, it didn't actually apply to the real world. And so you'd go and be in these real world scenarios where this information that you had just been told was relevant was actually completely outdated. And that really applies to the area of expertise I have, that we're not teaching designers and engineers and scientists how to understand the hidden life of things to make more informed and better decisions, especially even in like MBAs, right? Like, we're only just starting to teach MBA students about ESG, which is like a major driver right now in the economy, right? So there seems to be a lot of gaps. So that inspired me to start something called the Unschool of Disruptive Design, which is an experimental knowledge lab that I've been running for a decade now. So I moved to New York and basically just was like, I'm going to start a school for adults who give a shit about the world. I don't know if I'm allowed to swear on your podcast, but
we say fuck all the time here.
Great.
So.
And it was like crazy. It was like I unleashed a little like creativity energy source in New York at this time. It was just after my TED talk. So obviously I had a few connections and things, but it was amazing. Like, it was just, there was a lot of people like me who were early or mid-stage career who had a profession that they were doing, but were also like, guys, like, there's some problems here. We don't know how to actually engineer our careers to actually have a positive effect and impact. And so the Unschool was really about undoing some of the damage that academia does to our creativity and our capacity to work within the complex systems, and to also teach systems thinking and sustainability, which are two really fundamental tools for doing exactly that, like figuring out how do I contribute to the world around me. And so that's been going for 10 years now. We started running these fellowship programs, which were like 7 days, very intense. And I would take 20 people on these adventures around a city, and it would just be all about social innovation and entrepreneurship and like creativity. And these groups would just be very bonded, but also have like really profound experiences about other people making change. So a lot of engaging with social entrepreneurship in these different places, but also just seeing how much potential there is and then being able to catalyze that themselves. So yeah, the Unschool's been like a really amazing optimism boost every time I engage with anyone. Like we've had tens of thousands of students come through. We have a big online school now because obviously COVID killed a lot of the in-person stuff. But it just always reminds me of human ingenuity, passion, and just with the right ingredients, how simple it is for someone to just transform what they do into something really positive. And that's the thing. We need everyday people giving a shit about this stuff, because we're not going to solve a lot of these complex problems relying on just big business or government. It does actually need a mixture of solutions and different approaches. And so that's something I'm really passionate about, is just helping create that mix. So on one hand, I get to work with these people who are like career shifting to sustainability through the Unschool. And then I get to work with like CEOs and executives who are figuring out how to do this at scale using all the complexities of the supply chain and so forth. So yeah, it's pretty cool. That's basically where I'm at.
I love that. So I have a couple questions. So first of all, congrats. I mean, you're obviously doing some cool stuff, and I think my biggest takeaway is that you're obviously like a very curious person and a learner, and so I carry two of those characteristics myself. So it's like it's nice to see someone else that has it. With when you start thinking about, I guess, going back to this idea of, I mean, I'm a person that, and maybe I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Like, I'm like, life is design, right? Like, if everything I do or touch is designed, and you have two choices. It can be designed bad. Yeah.
We design the world and the world designs us. We're in this dynamic relationship, right? Where our choices create the data that creates the products and services, but that also we are then responding to it, right? So we're in this constant it's called, actually, there's a technical academic term. It's called ontological design, which is essentially the idea that we're in this process of being designed as well as designing the world around us, right? Like it's a very dynamic process that we are embedded in, which we don't realize, because from the moment we're born, the design world is influencing us, right? Like how you're born, actually, like is a different designed intervention. Anyway. Sorry, I cut you off.
No, that's cool. Like, it's actually interesting to think of it that way. And I intuitively I'm like a designy person, and so I appreciate what you just said. I had never thought of it from the standpoint of me getting designed once by me reacting to the design around me, right? And then that I shift and change, and then it's this kind of organic back and forth. That's really interesting. Shoot, I lost my train of thought.
Yeah, you said you said that you believe that we are designed and that life is design, and you were about to give 2 points on that.
Oh yeah. So for someone to come at especially at a young age, to come at, like, you're trying to figure out what you're interested in, your mind gets blown by this perspective of what is the life cycle of a product, and I think there's a lot of people that and I grew up in Southern California, but I lived in San Francisco for 17 years. And I remember, and my wife's family is very into like sustainability and like organic food. And so I meet my wife, and she's like working for like these like two women that work for NPR, and then she's working at a cheese for these people that make cheese, like artisan cheese. Your wife
sounds super cool.
Yeah, my wife's awesome. Like, she worked for these women called the Kitchen Sisters on NPR, and for Chez Panisse restaurant, and for this woman, these amazing cheesemongers in near Napa. And she's really involved in sustainable food. And so it was my first introduction to sustainability. Was actually my wife, who was my girlfriend at the time. And I grew up in like Southern California, where like nobody gave a shit about any of that stuff. And so it was interesting to see, like, she's like, what do you mean you don't, compost? And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, right. So like my first introduction to like what you're talking about was realizing that like not everything goes in the trash, right? And you can actually like take stuff in that separate organic from inorganic, and like the organic stuff can break down more naturally quicker. And I was like, oh, well, that makes sense. So I remember I'm 47, 46 years old. So this is like 20 plus years ago. And I remember like going home and seeing like my family has like one trash can. I'm like, or we had two, we had like recycling and just normal trash. And I'm like, Mom, we could like compost. And then she's like, well, what do you do with that? And I said, well, you could compost in the backyard, but in San Francisco, they actually have green bins. Like you can put them in. And I remember everywhere I went, this is a long-winded way of me appreciating what you said. Everywhere I went from that point forward, I'm like, they don't compost. And just thinking
so you
like you're
became
creating
like a
waste.
compost evangelist.
I know. I didn't speak about it. It was this is probably the first time I've ever mentioned
that gap. Like
right away.
That gap became almost like glaringly obvious. Yeah, that's how I live the world now. It's almost painful sometimes, because the thing is that, you know, the systems that we have right now are inherently unsustainable, meaning that we use up more resources than the earth produces. So right now we use 100 billion tons every year of raw materials to sustain the economy. We use 1.3 Earths, I think it is currently. So in July, August every year, we've used up all of the allocated resources for 1 year if we would actually be living within the capacity of the Earth to regenerate its resources.
Wow.
Right? So we have like this very unsustainable economy. And not only that, this is crazy, but like there's the biomass of all of the materials that humans have dug out of the ground and made. So all the buildings, all the products, everything is greater than the mass of all of the natural things left on the planet. So there's more human-made things by mass than there is natural things, which is just for like mind fuckery, right? Like, we have completely transformed the planet to meet our needs, but in the process of doing that, we've not considered the ramifications of that. And this isn't just a conversation about climate change, which we know right now is hitting us like hard. The bigger, like, climate change is pretty bad and scary, and it's going to affect a lot of people's lives. But the nature crisis is pretty freaking scary, because we need nature, like, not just for pollination, for food systems, but like the soil structure. Like, we put nature in our bodies every single day. Like, I am fueled, you are fueled by nature, right? Food, the quality of the food, and whether or not you're getting microplastics or heavy toxins, or whether you're actually getting nutrients, is based on soil. And the compost is the thing that re-adds nutrients to the soil. But for the last 70, 80 years, since post-Second World War, industrialization, our system of farming has basically been to grow something, extract it, take the whole plant away, and then put in chemical fertilizers to try and sustain nutrients. So we have removed the quality of nutrient density from the soil, which then also makes the soil less likely to sequester carbon. Like, it's crazy how our industrial systems have very high levels of ignorance to the way nature works. But that's changing. And that's the thing. Like, you know, the science on this is so profound now. Like, we can really understand at a minute and a macro level the impacts of our actions, so that knowledge can then influence decisions. And that's really the critical thing that's been missing. Like, your simple knowledge gap being filled, or being curiously inspired by your wife at the time, or girlfriend at the time. That's how it is, I think, for a lot of CEOs and a lot of boards and a lot of companies right now. They're like, oh shit, like, we didn't even know that was happening. I mean, sometimes they know and they're actively avoiding it, right? But a lot of the time, they have no idea. Like, you would be surprised how many companies I've worked with, they don't even really understand their supply chain. Like, they literally have a couple, and they're like, oh no, we just get that from X place. And then they're like,
well, how do they get it?
They don't know.
Well, so you're making like kind of a point, which is like, and I'm again like, so I'm a conscious capitalist, right? Which means like the stakeholder theory is part of conscious capitalism, and it's understanding the downstream effects and the liabilities that are created through like a conscious capitalist would know the detriment or the positivity of the supply chain, right? Because you're responsible for it. But I find, and you just said something a moment ago, and in my former business, I sold my last company, but before I did that, I used to say, because I dealt with it all the time, I had 1,000 employees in this company. I said, man, humans are 1 inch away from the nose, like creatures. Like, they wait till their nose hits the wall and then they react, as opposed to being like, hey, I shouldn't walk into that wall 100 feet away, right? But their nose has to hit the wall and they go, oh, that hurt, I shouldn't do that. And what I believe, at least what I've experienced, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, is I just think that capitalism it rewards transactional behavior in a lot of ways in the short term. in the short term, I can be super transactional and I get a financial reward because I'm not paying the future liability I'm creating. I'm not taxed on that.
How nerdy can I get right now?
Get like, if nerdiness is a 10 and a 1, give me like a 5.5.
Okay. So you're talking about externalities. Externalities are the things that are not accounted for in the current system. And the thing about capitalism is it is entirely based on this false notion that you can go and extract resources from nature without paying a cost. So we do not equate any financial losses or gains from the services that nature provides us. So in the current GDP-based system, all of nature's services are externalized. So the only time we start accounting for a material from nature is after it's been extracted, or the process of extraction. But we don't account for the losses that extraction has. So if you cut down a tree, you're actually preventing the stability of the land, you're stopping sequestering of carbon. So there's all of these costs, but they're not accounted for. So that's an externality. And the thing about externalities is that they do not directly affect the people who gain from creating them.
Right.
So when you go and destroy nature in your capitalistic pursuits and you generate a shit ton of profit that you are then, rolling around in the benefits of, the system, the delay in the effect on the system is paid for by other parties. You are unlikely to be directly affected by it. So that then means that externality is distributed to other parties in the system and they bear the burden of that bad decision. And because there isn't a direct feedback there isn't any mechanisms like a tax on hurting nature, you do not have any direct understanding unless you actively go to seek that out. And you actually have no penalty in that sense. And so one of the big things that people rile against in the attempts to create taxes or financial mechanisms to solve the sustainability problems we face, whether that be climate change or whatever, is they just feel very pained by the idea of having to pay for something that was always free. And nature is not free, but it is perceived as being free, or the services that nature produces are perceived as being free. And so that's at the one end of the spectrum, extraction and exploitation of nature with no accountability. But then at the other end, we have the waste system, which is another externality. And that is that a company does not bear the cost of producing waste outside of their production. So right now, most of the products and services that you or I as general consumers engage with have been designed, the physical form and the packaging, and then we are burdened with the bad design decisions because we have to deal with the waste. And what I mean by that is either you take something out of its packaging and you throw its waste away, but you paid for that. You pay for your local government to come to your house and pick that up and then find a way to get rid of that doesn't pollute your environment. So you often have to pay for it to be externally managed by other parties, which is often exporting it to pretty impoverished nations for pretty poor processing because of the cheaper labor. Okay, so that's another externality. But the thing is that the cost is borne on you and your community. It's not borne on the company. So again, that's an externality that directly affects you. So another externality is air pollution. 9 million people die every year from air pollution, or water pollution. So the thing is that the capitalistic system is an ignorant system because it does not account for the impact that it has on the systems that it relies on to sustain itself, because capitalism would not exist without nature. So it is a fundamentally flawed system in that sense. And there's a lot of movement to try and rectify this, where we're having a lot of discussions around how do we actually account? Does nature have a value, and what value would that be? And how would we account for that? It's called true cost accounting. There's also wellness indexes and GDP mechanisms that account for the cost to society that business activities have, because presently we don't account for that. So there's lots of how do we solve these problems? This isn't new to a lot of economists. This is a big part of how economists who understand the environment and social impact try to create better mechanisms of accounting. And ESG in one way is trying to rectify that, but that's really just working at the market level versus the actual supply chain, the reality of the supply chain is that, you know, you go to nature, you take stuff, you don't pay for the cost of extraction, you don't pay for the cost of pollution. And that's a really big part of this unsustainability in our economy.
So thank you for, and I thought that was a nice 5.5. Like I followed you the whole time. All right. So I
took your instructions.
Yeah, that was very good. That was fantastic. So like while you're saying all that, a couple thoughts popped in my head, and I'm like, okay, first of all, I see it, and you know, there's that, what's that quote? Like, he who has the gold makes the rules, right? And so you have this world where, like, the people that have the money, capitalists, are like, I don't want to pay for all that shit. It's free. So like,
well,
and then
they
you
don't
have
pay taxes in the US, that's for sure.
Yeah. We have a lot of ways to get around paying it. So again, this transactional short-term thinking, and then while you were saying it, I'm a person that, again, being a hardcore entrepreneur, capitalist, hearing like, man, that's a lot of regulation you'd have to like put in place, and governments are not known for being super efficient and effective in their management of regulation, right?
Well,
Some are better than others.
Sure. And I mean, I use the European Union as an example, but it's a very different mechanism because the European Union is a series of countries with their own governments, and the union makes up rules that apply to all of them that they then have to implement in their own country level. So there's a huge movement right now. There's a lot of new regulations that will affect US companies that are about, if you want, I can go into them. They're a bit boring, but they're what I think a lot of US companies don't realize is that they're going to be fucked come 2026. If they sell products into the European Union, they have huge accountability now that they are not going to be able to meet unless they're starting their accounting systems right now. So there's the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, which essentially requires companies to measure and report against the ESG criteria. And then if they're exposed to certain criteria, climate change, material shortages, and so forth, they actually have to respond to quite detailed accountability to those, and they have to make these reports publicly available. And this is for any company that sells goods into the European Union that's publicly listed, SMEs and large companies. But then, so that's just kind of like the big end of town. Then it doesn't matter what size you are. If you sell products into the European Union, there's a new regulation called the Eco Design regulation, which actually requires products to be designed against sustainability criteria. And if they're not, then consumer groups can sue the company or an importer to hold them accountable for the lack of sustainability in their products. And then the cool thing, though, especially if you're a tech entrepreneur, now there's the main thing that's going to like operationalize this is what's called a digital product passport, which is a digital twin of the full life of the product. So of course, a nerd like me who loves the life of products is now going to be on a digital registry, and that's going to be like blockchain certified. All companies have to produce that supply chain lifecycle information of their products, make it available on the database, which is not set up yet. And then there'll be like some sort of on product QR or RFID code that anyone can scan to gain that information. And there will be publicly available information, but then also supply chain information.
So if you have Europe, so let's use the example you just gave. That okay, the Europeans have their act together, they're more progressive, they care about this, but the planet isn't called Europe. The planet has multiple continents,
right?
Right. So
but Europe's a huge player in the market, right? And I agree with you. But what we've seen historically, so there were two key pieces of legislation that came into effect from the European Union around 15, 20 years ago that changed. Like there was one called the Ross Directive, the Restrictions of Hazardous Substances, which made 9 substances not available in products. And over the next 15 years, all other countries aligned to that because the manufacturing base changed, right? So I agree. But at the same time, what we're seeing happening is that a lot of other countries, including my country of Australia, I've been working a lot in Asia, everyone's trying to figure this out. It's not just about everyday products. It's actually about how do we clean up the supply chain, because we have plastic pollution, we have all of these problems, and they're causing significant impacts to human health, to human livelihood. So these, I get what you're saying, but also like California, you mentioned a few times, is super progressive in this space too, in the sense that they do have regulations that help companies figure out how to do better. Now, I will say, I am not someone who loves a lot of regulations, actually. How I see it is the best way to make change is incentives, not restrictions.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. So I like legislations that are incentive based, right? So you're constantly trying to improve the system, and it's competitive based because people love competition. Companies love it, right? But there are some rule based mechanisms that will really help change the economy. And what the things I just gave you an example of here, what's going to happen is if, let's say, 40% of the world's producers of primary goods, let's just say like technology, fashion, they all start using the digital product passport system. If you're not part of that, you will then be penalized by the market. So it will have a global transformation over time. It might not be immediate unless it fails as a system, right? But what I see happening is that there's a very unique case study, which was France 2 years ago implemented a repair rule, which made all producers of technology, so think, we're both wearing Apple EarPods right now, AirPods. So they have to now do a self-assessment against 10 points. It's actually a really cool system. It's basically like a tiny little checklist. Have we made these repairable? Do we have repair manuals? Do we sell repair parts? Do we provide the tools so that people can repair them? And then they get a score between 1 and 10, and it's a rating, and they have to then publicly share that rating on every single product they're selling. So it's a color scheme. And so what happened was when they implemented this, Apple, for the first time ever in the history of the company, released its repair manuals because it looked so bad that it had to improve its performance against its competitors. So that's an example of, I think, a really cool rule that just makes the market more responsible. They have to self-assess against a basic checklist, and then they see how poorly they're performing against their peers. They then have to change their behavior. I just think that's a really cool mechanism, and it does provide transparency, which consumers want, but it also makes the companies realize that they have gaps and they need to improve. And that motivates action. Rather than saying you can't do this, it's saying we expect all players in our market to provide a minimum level of repairability. And if you don't want to perform well, you're just going to look bad and customers will know now. And I just think it's a really great mechanism. And I think these kinds of tools are what we're going to see more of, where companies are having to be transparent about the decisions they've made in their businesses so that customers can make better decisions when it comes to these choices.
Do you think that, so if Europe's saying, hey, we have these more stringent guidelines if you want to sell to us, and we're you have a pretty massive economy there with all the different countries. If you're a manufacturer, let's say you're an Asia-based or you're a United States-based manufacturer, you're not in the EU, but you want to sell there, is what you're saying is that, well, look, in order for them to be able to sell to that market, they have to spend all this money to either redesign all their products and have a separate set of manufacturing for Europe, or it's just cheaper for them to just do it on all their products. Is that kind of what happens?
That's what happens. That's exactly what happens. And so interestingly, though, I do a lot of work in Asia, and many of the primary producing countries in Asia are also looking at all of this. There's circular economy laws being implemented in most of the major markets in Asia. I mean, China has had one for a long time. How effective they are at actually, some of them are about domestic circularity, meaning they don't want to deal with all the plastic waste. So most of the world's ocean plastic waste is coming out of 7 rivers that are mainly in the Asia Pacific region. And there's a huge cost to that. So Philippines, Thailand, known for typhoons, flooding. So in 2011, the whole of Bangkok flooded, causing huge economic damage and individual health issues, because all the plastic prevented the water from escaping via the rivers, because they had plastic grates to prevent pollution, and there was so much of it that it created a film. And this happens all the time. So flooding, as we go into climate change, as flooding becomes worse, communities that have a lot of litter that is plastic based can actually exacerbates the problem, because the plastic acts as a preventer for the water to escape in a rapid way.
Wow.
So you think of the cost of that. The cost of that waste is not just that someone has, it's that if you then are going to manage this plastic product that has been imposed upon this community by the producers, that you have to have multiplicitable waste management. You have to have a location to get rid of it. You have to pay people to go around and pick it up. And that is just prevention for these bigger economic impacts when they happen. But most of these countries can't afford those kinds of social services, because those social services are paid through taxes.
Right.
And so, if your economy is not really high, you're not taxing highly. Do you know what I mean? And then that's taking money from education and healthcare and other really important things to clean up plastic waste that should just be designed better. Do you see what I mean? It's like,
yeah, look, it makes sense to me. I'm just trying, going back to one of the earlier questions I had about coming at it from a sociology standpoint, right? Where a socialistic standpoint, where you have people essentially who short-term greedy, right? They're doing the things, and then what's end up happening is we have these longer-term effects, the climate change. You have the effect that you just mentioned right now around plastic grading, collection, pollution, and then basically making it where you flood your cities, right? And then you have sick people in poor countries that can't afford to do this. And so we're seeing in California, I live in Texas, right? Where because of the weather volatility, you have it where you can't get homeowners insurance, or it's 5x. My homeowners insurance went up 3 times. And in Florida, you can't get homeowners insurance because of the hurricane.
Or California, right? Because of the wildfires.
Or because of the fires, right?
All those multi-million-dollar mansions that can't be insured now because of the wildfires and therefore can't be resold.
I have a friend who has a $300 million piece of land in Napa that he cannot get insurance on. And on that land is a $30 million home. And it's uninsurable. He's because it's in a fire zone.
Ironically, Darius, back in the day, the insurance thing was a major part of the justification around why sustainability needs to be considered at high levels. And the ESG movement, in one way, was spurred on by insurance, part of that underwriting insurance, because the underwriters are the ones who are guys, we know. They're the ones doing the studies and seeing the science and saying this is a floodplain, this is a fire play area. So if you're an insurer, you're basically a gambler, essentially. You're gambling on whether or not you're going to earn more money in not having to solve people's problems when they happen. And floods, fires, extreme weather events. I mean, like you said, Texas, part of the problem there was that deep freeze that you had.
Yeah.
When Texas froze, and no infrastructure is designed to be frozen in Texas. So extreme weather event. So then that triggers clauses in contracts that say under these circumstances, we're not going to insure you. And so what happens is increasingly you start to have a decaying of the safety nets that enabled a lot of that capitalistic activity to happen. Because people will not, owning a $300 million property without insurance is a massive liability, right? But now it's like that game hot potato. Your friend has stopped with the hot potato because it just so happened at this time, they're now the ones stuck with an uninsurable piece of property, and that's not going to change. And that is, this is the new landscape we're in. Now, at the same time of saying that, I think what we really need to do is come out at a bigger picture. And what's actually going on here is that these are called feedback loops. And ultimately, we live in a complex system. Capitalism is a system, and it's been, exponentially growing for the last couple hundred years. There's been a few moments where it's had to kind of, deal with some global challenges, but it is like any system that is growing, and it's growing at an exponential rate. So it's just more of itself. At some point, it's going to reach its limits of growth, because every system will have a limit to growth. And then it will have to figure out how to survive in a resource constrained environment, because it's absorbed and I think we're very close to that, in the sense that the whole idea of the virus on the petri dish, at some point it's going to have absorbed all of the available nutrients. It's going to hit the edge of the petri dish and have no way. Is it going to break out of the petri dish? That's the thing. And we break out of Earth and we go to Mars. Well, I love that this is let's colonize Mars as the solution to ruining the only known life-sustaining planet in the entire fucking universe. It's just so reductive. And of course, it's coming from people who are so insulated from the rest of the world. The biggest billionaires in the planet are the ones who are going on about escaping Earth or building their bunkers in Hawaii because they themselves are just so insulated from the real world problems. They actually have such a selective bias to the information that they obtain that they are completely ignorant to these systems at play. And so, I think like, I don't know what the future will hold because I'm not a psychic. I have a crystal ball. But the one thing I do know is the future is not defined, right? So it is actually made up of the actions that we take today. So how we vote, the things we buy, the things we invest in, these all change the system that we're in and the flavor. Like I see it almost like a big pot of soup that's constantly simmering, right? Like, do you know about one of those endless soups, where like people just keep adding stuff and it just keeps developing its flavor? And, it's like, that's what we're in. And the ingredients that we put in flavor the pieces of the soup, right? Like that are in there. We are in that dynamic relationship we talked about. And so the things we invest in, the things that we choose to buy, the things we click on, these are all pieces of data that once amalgamated into larger sets of information drive the direction of this ship we're on, right? Like, so what the future that we end up in is going to be a future built on the decisions made today. And to me, that's like overwhelming and incredibly inspiring at the same time. So, like what we are living in right now are the decisions of the past, right? But there were decisions of the past made without understanding of the impacts because until the 70s, we didn't know anything about nature, to be completely fair, right? Like we had such a limited understanding of cause and effect relationships between human activities and the natural world, and also a very strong ignorance to the reliance that we have on nature for the sustenance of systems. I mean, I'm talking about like, Western knowledge systems, because most indigenous knowledge systems have, for a very long time known that humans are interdependent on nature and therefore make choices to respect those systems. But so in the kind of modern context, it's only been the last 30, 40 years that we've had that feedback loop and that data to understand. And so it's like now we have this knowledge and information. The choices we make based on that knowledge and information should drive us forward into a future that is better than today. Like that's certainly my goal. And if we don't get there, then in my head, and this is how I rationalize it, I'm like, well, this grand experiment we're on is going to end one way. Because I mean, at the end of the day, like it's an incredible gift to be alive, like I said, on the only known life-sustaining planet in the universe. And for that, it's like, what can we do with this time that we have to figure out how we could, in my mind, live on the planet in a way that means that we can continue to live on the planet. Because right now, unfortunately, a lot of the choices we're making, it's eliminating our success. And that's what you said about the nose at the wall. And I'm not saying that to be really nihilistic, because I actually truly believe that humans have the capacity to solve these problems. It's just how much collateral damage happens in the process of figuring that out. And when I say collateral damage, I mean not just to the social inequality that we have, but also the interspecies inequality, because we are losing nature at an exceptionally fast rate, and we need nature. Like we need dung beetles to eat through shit. We need bees to pollinate. We need natural systems. We cannot survive without them. And so it is really like this kind of fundamental challenge is like, what can humans do with the knowledge we have now to not just rectify mistakes of the past, but to ensure that we can actually design systems so that we can live regeneratively on this planet. We can give back more than we take, so we can get into that space where we're operating on the resources of one planet. And that is really based on us shifting our current systems, which are inherently unsustainable. They are waste-based systems. We are the only species that generates waste that is non-digestible by nature. And so, that is a rectifying problem. That is one of the main things we need to rectify, is how do we turn waste into resources so that we are not continuing to create these externalities that pollute and drive the demand for more resource extraction.
Yeah,
I just went up to like a 7 in my nerdiness. Sorry.
I think I followed you. I appreciate it. So to not be nihilistic though, what's his name? Gosh, George Carlin. You ever follow George Carlin, the comedian?
No.
So he's a famous comedian from like the 80s and like a really famous American comedian. And he has this whole bit where he's like, the Earth's gonna be just fine. He's like, humans, on the other hand, we're fucked.
Yeah.
He's like, Mother Earth's gonna be just fine. She's been here for a long time.
The dinosaurs probably had their own way of communicating and thought they were going to be fine. And to be fair, like, the asteroid that hit the Earth that eradicated the dinosaurs, it was a pretty catastrophic and immediate event. And the things that we're doing like more the kind of frog boiling in the slowly heating hot water, because a lot of the things that are happening are small things that build up over time, right? Like the oceans right now, the big issue with the ocean is that as the Earth heats, right, and you get more acidity in the oceans, a lot of the different interdependent systems start to collapse. And so it just becomes a faster and faster rate of decay. And so we don't see that happening, right? Like but we're seeing the more extreme weather events more frequently because of the fact that the ocean is getting hotter and hotter, and it's also getting more acidic, right? So it's the pH level of the ocean is changing. And, crazy fact, one of the reasons that the pH level is going up is because of whaling, because whale poo has a really high amount of nutrients and iron, and that feeds all of these microorganisms in the ocean that then are like low down on the food chain. I know, it's like
like whaling. Like what is this? Like 18? Are we in the 1800s? It's like Moby Dick. Who the hell's why are we whaling? Like.
Well, there are countries who still whale, and I mean, there's the famous Sea Shepherd captain, the anti-whaling captain, who's currently in prison in Greenland and facing extradition to Japan. Iceland recently started whaling again. It's a complicated situation. I mean, it's a resource. It's a resource that people want to exploit. You talk about capitalism, and this is it in play. And then there's also a lot of cultural arguments. So Japan and Iceland argue that they are entitled to whale because it's a big part of their culture. But then as a woman, I also like to remind people of how controlling, abusing women was part of culture for a long time. And we've moved beyond that, thankfully, mostly. And we used to, do pretty atrocious things to kids, and society has decided that that's not appropriate. And so we have collectively moved beyond that culture. And so I would argue that some of these cultural practices that are collectively not beneficial need to be reconsidered. And that is controversial for sure, because we want to also make sure that cultures have the right to practice their traditions that are beneficial. But, this is the thing about the social side of things. All these problems are human problems, right? Like these are human created problems. And so therefore they're human solvable problems, but like we don't necessarily have a lot of time left to focus on these problems because we're very distracted by a lot of insignificant problems. And distraction is a really great way to control a system.
So when I know we're almost out of time here, and I appreciate you letting me run over. Before we get to the end of the show, I don't want everyone leaving this show being like, "Oh my God, we're screwed," because I do think like it is overwhelming.
Sure, I can talk about positive things.
So what's the one thing that you think anyone, whether you're an entrepreneur, CEO, just a normal person listening to this, and you're like, I don't want to go to bed and have nightmares about this. I want to make a difference. What's an easy thing people can do, whether it's in their life or in their business, to start to create some positive change in these like circular systems?
Well, you actually touched on it at the beginning. Like you talked about composting, which is one action. It's actually, to be fair, the biggest negative impact on nature and on climate is the food system. So what you eat and where you buy your food and how you interact with the food waste you produce is the single biggest impact category that a human can make. And if you're a business, the food you're buying to fuel that business, whether it be catering or if you're a big tech company and how you're feeding your staff, all of these things really matter. They really, really matter. In fact, all the studies from the UN show over and over again, if we reduce red meat consumption, we would dramatically reverse a lot of the demands on nature, because like a lot of the Amazon is cleared to grow soy to feed cows, so that we have, 97% of meat produced in America is in factory farms, and factory farms, it's about density. And what happens, again, I'm going to talk about shit again, because basically the problem is in these highly dense environments, on concrete floor, I mean, torturous to the animals, but aside that, they shit a lot. And a lot of that waste actually runs off into nature, okay? And that then becomes a nutrient source at scale that, like, when you have effluent runoff from chicken farms, it creates a eutrophication of the waterways, which then creates algae blooms. You know about algae blooms, right?
Mm-mm.
But there's this, algae bloom is like when you've got a lot of shit, it's food. It's food for particular types of microorganisms. And then they have a population explosion. And when they have that, they suck the oxygen out of the water. And so there's 450 dead zones in the oceans right now, where there's literally vast swaths of the ocean. I'm getting depressive again. Hang on. I'll bring it back.
Go
it back.
positive. You're like, I can't help myself. I know too much.
Exactly. No, I'm just trying to paint the picture here, because again, this is the food system, right? And so this is really important, because the food you choose to eat has phenomenal impacts. And so this isn't about avoiding eating meat. It's about, if you want to talk about, it's about quality over quantity. So finding quality producers who are actively avoiding the damaging practices and investing in them. So you are going to spend a bit more money, but you're going to have a higher quality product that's going to then invest in that product expanding. And I mean, we have seen that with non-dairy milks. Like now it's normal. Like when I'm lactose intolerant, so I can't really have dairy. And so years ago, it would be like so painful trying to have a coffee. You'd be like, do you have a soy milk? And now it's like oat, soy, almond, you have options everywhere. And it's just normal now, right? And that's just because, to be fair, actually, I think for a lot of people, it tastes better, it's healthier, whatever. The choices are there. And so I think that that's really part of that economic choice that we all have to exert our influence in the system at micro, individual choices, and macro collectively. So food systems are the biggest thing you can do to affect change. If you want to expand that, if you are a business owner, you should understand the impact of your actions as a business. You need to know what's going on. You really do. And it does cost a little bit of money in consultants or someone to bring them on to actually do an impact assessment, but figure out where your impacts are occurring and then make better choices. And most of the time, these impacts are so fixable and they save you money, because a lot of the time, this is about inefficiencies where resources are being wasted when they could be used in more efficient ways. But then there's also the kind of expansion beyond just impact reduction, which is participating in the circular economy, which is a global movement away from the linear extractive economy to one where we produce goods and services that are designed to fit within a circular system. And so if you're a business owner, a lot of the time, that means actually changing your business model. So a big part of that is the idea that instead of selling products that externalizes the accountability to the customer, we talked about, the company actually owns the products for its whole life and they sell the service of that product. So we're already seeing this happening with the PaaS system, product to services. But when you do it from a sustainability perspective, you're intentionally engineering the system to minimize waste and maximize usability and functionality. So, in the circular economy, we talk about 3 core goals. That is to eliminate waste from the system, to make things last longer. So the longer things last and the more functionality that they achieve in the economy, the less we have to go to nature to extract more resources.
Yeah.
But if you're a business, you don't want just a really long-lasting product you've sold once, because you're not going to generate a profit off that. So you want to own those products for a long period of time, and you want to create the business model where you keep bringing them back and reselling them or reusing them, right? So you're actually making more money off less resources. And it's actually an incredible business model if done well, because you can maximize profits of minimal material impacts. And then the customer still gets a high value experience. And then the last goal is to regenerate nature. And that really requires businesses to understand the intersection that they have with the natural world and making choices to ensure that products are produced in more regenerative ways. And we're seeing that a lot in the agricultural sector, but it is expanding now beyond that to companies, especially in the who rely on mining and extractive industries to produce their products. So, I mean, like, that's a super quick snapshot of what the circular economy is, but I guarantee you there's no avoiding this. I know that in the US, the circular economy hasn't really penetrated business. It's still very much a conversation about climate change, but like, let you be warned. Like, this is a huge movement. It's coming. And, you know, the thing is obviously politics affects this, but at the same time, like, if you are a business who sells products and services outside of the US, you will be affected by these things at some point in the near future. So it doesn't matter what the political situation locally is. It matters how exposed you are to these threats externally to your main market. Like, you know, and I'm working with a lot of different companies. You would be so surprised at how many sectors of society are already figuring out that this is not just like makes good business sense, but also that the writing's on the wall for certain material flows, like certain plastics. And so they are really figuring out how to transition. I don't know if you saw Lego have committed to being fully plastic free. You know, so there's lots of, it's a fascinating space, and there's a lot happening, and it's well beyond just the kind of like do better. It's now full business integration, right? Like, this is about the full picture, and it is absolutely a positive economic opportunity for businesses when they do it well. Like, it might, like any R&D, cost a bit at the beginning to figure out how to do it, but once you've actually got it set up effectively with all the right science and understanding, these are very, very robust business models. That because ultimately you're making more money off less resources.
I love that. You've both scared the shit out of me and inspired the hell out of me today.
My job is done.
Yeah. Great job, Leyla. I'm going to go to sleep and have dreams and nightmares that are blow my mind. No, seriously, I really appreciate you coming on here today and teaching us all about this. So we have a lot of entrepreneurs and business people listening to the show. And just a lot of people that care about like making a better world for, if you got kids or you got family, you want them to live in a better world that's not going to implode, that has hurricanes and fires.
And also you want to live in a better world, because, you know, I hope to live for another 50, 60 years, maybe. Maybe not that long. Let's see how like we get with medical interventions. But
we can do it.
I mean, right now we're suffering the effects of a lot of these things, and it's scary. Yeah. And, you know, there's a huge thing called eco-anxiety now, where like literally people have symptoms similar to general anxiety disorder as a result of all of the environmental catastrophes that are happening.
Yeah, I've seen some of that. Freaking Gen Z wimps. No, I'm kidding.
No, we did a study actually, and it's not. It actually is affecting our generation, you know, millennials, X's, and boomers even. Can you believe boomers give a shit about something?
Yeah, they're gonna be dead. What do they care?
So
if I care about us.
We just did a report on this. It's freely available, and it has like actions individuals can take. But it's very cool because the science says that the solution to weak anxiety is actually spending time in nature. And so one of the like recommendations for a business is to actually have meetings where you like go for a walk in the park, which sounds dumb, but has actual cognitively, scientifically proven benefits. You get more endorphins, it's healthy, like all of this stuff. So there's like cool strategies in there that can help, because eco anxiety is becoming a really big issue around workplace productivity as well.
Okay. All right. So anyone, I want to go to the greatness question. I know we're out of time, but I would love for you to share where people can learn more about all the amazing things you're working on. Sure. And you're working on so much. So share with our audience, and then let's go to the greatness question.
Okay, well, so the Unschool, you can grab a lot of these resources, and you can also sign up to any of our courses or classes on any of the topics. So that's unschools.co. I also have a consultancy on the circular economy called Circular Futures, where we actually advise and support companies in using a kind of strategic foresight approach to figure out how to map this and get to that really cool state. I have LinkedIn learning courses. So if you are a premium subscriber to LinkedIn, you can access 3 or 4 of my courses on the circular economy, on how to do sustainability leadership, as an innovation opportunity. So they're really easy to access. I know that like Microsoft recently licensed them to like 25 million people or something. So a
Nice.
lot of people do have access to them. And then I'm always running courses. I do talks all over the world. A lot of the time, you know, in Europe and the US. So you can follow me on socials and then learn about where I'm doing those talks and workshops. And yeah, so leylaacaroglu.co, which you're never going to know how to spell because no one even knows how to say it. I think it's actually .com is my website, but it's Acaroglu. Which, to be fair, Darius, I didn't even know how to say it until I was like 14.
You screwed up your own name. Come on. No, we'll put all that stuff in the show notes. I was practicing while you were talking to them. Acaroglu, so I got that.
Oh my gosh, that was so good. That
Boom.
was you're a quick learner.
You know, some people got it. I got it. All right. Well, look, we'll make sure to put all that stuff in the show notes. Leyla, you ready for the greatness question?
I am. Go for it.
All right, let's do it. So, what is the number one barrier to creating greatness that you've overcome in your life, and how did you overcome it?
So, I think I have multiple barriers, but you said number one, and I like your instruction. And this is a really sad response because I've had many barriers in my life, and this is a reflection on the world that we live in. But my number one barrier is my gender. So I'm a pretty outspoken lady person. And it's been a constant problem in my life that I present as a female but have the personality of like an entrepreneurial man. And it has actually been a consistent problem to the point where it's been articulated to me at multiple points by people who are like, you would just be so successful if you were a man, because I exert a lot of the personality traits of a male figure. And unfortunately, we still live in a world where there is gender stereotypes that impose upon people based on how they present. Although, you know, I have kind of a little bit of a ambiguous gender these days. And I always wonder if I'm like physically present in the world based on these like micro experiences I've had over 25 years of, you know, trying to build a career. But I will say, like, the problem I have with this is that how many people are we losing from the system because of unfair expectations of how people should behave or perform because of their presentation, whatever, gender or sexual identity or whatever else, race, you know. And I think that this is a really big loss because what it happens is that microaggressions build up over time. They affect people's self-esteem. They affect their willingness to contribute. And so I think it's just something really, for me anyway, it's something I really reflect on in my own practice. And when I work with people is like, what stereotypes am I bringing to this conversation and how can I let go of them and let this person just be this person? And let that be the thing that helps me understand that human. Because what happens is the human brain can't help but create categories, which is what a stereotype is. And so we categorize people just for efficiency, and then they become these rigid frameworks that we impose on people. And so then when people overstep that expectation, we often have a kind of frustration or so forth. And of course, I don't expect you, Darius, to be having gender stereotypes against me or anything, but it happens to all of us, right? Like, and it is just something to reflect on. And I think the way it's affected me in my life is I have a lot of experiences where I am actively put in my place as a female by males, like told, like literally it happened. I just did a tour of the US and it happened 3 times where it's
wait. So when you say, what does it mean to be put in your place? I want to hear this.
Can be little things like questioning about how I ended up in being allowed to be a keynote speaker, like above everybody else. Like, why are you in this space, right? Which could be a genuine question, right? Okay. It could be, but the way it's often framed, and the person that's usually asking the question is usually the person they're so shocked, basically, that you're in this space with that authority, and they can't understand because in their world, this representation doesn't usually get there, right? And you could think I'm being overly sensitive, but when you actually, like, I've gotten on a stage before, and as I'm getting on stage, I was introduced as, you know, doctor because I have a PhD, and this person was like, how cute that you have a PhD. Literally said cute to me. And I was like, why would you use a diminutive word? Is it cute because I'm like, what the, and yeah, that's like, weird. You know, Yeah, but this is constant, right? It's constant, and the thing is like I just laugh it off now, but it is a really big thing. When I did my PhD, I was one of only a few female in industrial design department, and therefore you're constantly being critiqued or questioned by a male bias, which is part of the world, but it does also then influence the perception that people have on you. So I think I've become successful despite my gender. But it is a problem. In the design industry, it is predominantly male, predominantly. And that affects the way products are designed. I just posted on LinkedIn about this, about all of the health implications of the fact that a lot of products are not designed for female bodies, like spacesuits. And it just creates all of these biases in physical form that make it harder for women to do jobs. Like I do a lot of like DIY stuff. Most tools are designed for male grip, so you have a different grip. Anyway, I could go on about it for days. But I guess the point that I'm trying to expose is that we are all susceptible to biases and stereotyping. It's part of humanity, okay? It's impossible to be bias-free.
Sure.
But I think the problem is that we don't realize sometimes the questions we ask or the way we engage with someone, especially if we're surprised, whether because of their race or their age or their, how they're allowed to be in a situation, how that can affect them, right? How it can perhaps make it harder for them to just be them. And that's the thing I think that I've always struggled with, is that my personality is seen as being an ill fit for a female form. Not all the time, but in some cases. And then that creates this like control mechanism where people are trying to put me back in my place. And I find it really hilarious because I really like having a lot of energy and being a very ambitious person.
Yeah.
But these are things that are seen as not traditionally feminine. And so therefore, in certain situations, there's this like expectation that I will behave or perform differently. And yeah, I don't know. It's very hard to explain it in a short period of time. I just wrote an article about it actually using the ontological design stuff because I really question. I'm like 42, right? I've been doing this over 20 years professionally. I really question how much of me now is me, or how much of me is a reaction to the world that I've had to experience. So because I do have to invest a significant amount of my energy in combating these stereotypes and biases, when I should just be doing what I do. And if I was less controlled by those experiences, I wonder how much more energy and capacity I'd have to actually do what I do.
Well, there's a technical term we have here at the Greatness Machine for what you're talking about. It's called "fuck that guy," and so, so I just like to throw that out there because and my sense is this: like, I would agree. When there's the assumptions and you're getting it consistently, then you start to you kind of meet people where they're at, and you might like dial it down a little bit to just like kind of move to the next step, and the whole world doesn't get the true authentic you, maybe. But I'm gonna go out on a ledge here and say that like I think you're doing a pretty damn good job of like putting it out there, and like kudos to you. And so I think that the more of this that's out there, the more other people who maybe don't have your natural enthusiasm to put themselves out there are inspired to do it. So I'm like I said, I'm inspired by it, and it just takes more. The more it gets normalized, the less stupid people will say the dumb things they say to you, and then before you know it, we don't have to hear any of it at all.
These days, I have literally I either laugh or I just have like a fuck-filled like little temper tantrum and then move on. But it happens a lot, and it's surprising how much it happens as well. But you know what? At the end of the day, everybody faces challenges. That's why you have this question. What are the barriers? And barriers can be things that crush you or build you. And for sure, in my reflection on this, it's really about a character building reflection. Like, how do I, exactly to that point, use these challenges as things that help me perhaps set an example or lead or provide a pathway for other people. But, to be fair, I would love to see more females in my industry as leaders, but they're not. And it's a consistent problem. And you can't help but question then how this problem continues to perpetuate, despite that 50% of design schools are filled with women and men. But in leadership positions, it's like under 5%. So, you have this huge gap, but it's changing. It's changing. It takes time.
I was going to say, it takes time. You got to boil the frog. Come on. But no, well, Leyla, it was such a pleasure having you on the show today. I'm really excited for all the amazingness. I had a great
time. Thank you for having me. I'm glad that we got to reconnect after whatever period, or actually connect. And it was been a really great conversation with you today.
Definitely. And when next time you get a chance, go have a birria taco at my cousin's place in Melbourne. Ding away.
I will.
Ding away my taco. All right. Guys, thank you so much for listening. Listen, as leaders, we have to share this information so that others can learn and be introduced to Leyla's amazing work. And go check her out. We'll put all the notes in the show notes. Until next time, peace out. We love you. You are listening to The Greatness Machine, and that's a wrap for today. Listen, if you love what you heard, subscribe to the show on whatever podcast platform that you're tuning in on so that you don't miss any of our future episodes. We have tons of great people coming on, and we're stoked to have you here to enjoy it with us. Leave us a review. Tell us what you love most about this particular episode. We love getting the reviews. We love to see what you guys love most. And if this particular episode, made you think of someone who's leveling up in their business and in their life, print screen, share it with them. Leaders are the best givers, and after all, we're all here to support and grow with each other. And in case you want to see some of the fun behind the scenes shots or some of the things that we're doing, I'm actually writing about this in my weekly newsletter. Go to www.therealdarius.com and subscribe to my newsletter. We're talking about fun things like business and life and mindfulness and cryptocurrencies and gosh, I don't even know, everything and anything, but it's tons of fun stuff I write about. I try to get it out on a weekly basis. You can subscribe at www.therealdarius.com. And with that said, look, thank you guys so much. I appreciate you. I love you. Peace. We're out of here. See you guys on the next one.
She's my lover.